So first off, can you just explain what indications tazemetostat is currently approved for?
So for follicular lymphoma patients, tazemetostat is approved for adults with relapsed or refractory follicular lymphoma if they have an EZH2 mutation in their tumor and if they've received at least 2 prior therapies, or other patients with relapsed and refractory follicular lymphoma who don't have satisfactory alternative treatment options.
So briefly, what is the approval of tazemetostat based on?
The approval of tazemetostat is based on really data from a clinical trial in patients with relapsed and refractory follicular lymphoma. These were patients that received the drug really 800 milligrams twice a day. And it's based on the findings that in this group of patients, tazemetostat was active and also could induce remissions in this group of patients, as well as was essentially well tolerated in this group of patients.
So why is the approval of tazemetostat in this space so important?
Well, patients with recurrent follicular lymphoma have a limited number of treatment options. Most of this group of patients in the clinical trial that led to its approval had received basically, they all had received essentially 2 or more prior treatment regimens. And so this is a group of patients that has typically already received chemotherapy, already received rituximab, which is a standard treatment approach for follicular lymphoma. And so really there are limitations in the number of treatment options that this group of patients has. And while there may be other options that they do have, tazemetostat is an oral agent. It's generally well tolerated. And so I think it represents an option for some patients for whom the alternatives may either not be effective or may not be particularly well tolerated as far as the side effect profile.
So I know that you said that tazemetostat is generally well tolerated, but are there any notable adverse events observed in some patients?
Sure, there are side effects like with any drug. Tazemetostat has been associated with hematologic side effects, anemia, low white blood cell counts, low platelet counts. These are almost all grade 1 and 2 in nature. The other sort of side effects that patients have had include fatigue, infectious complications, nausea, diarrhea. Again, almost all of these toxicities were grade 1 and 2 in nature.
So what would you say is most important for practicing oncologists to understand regarding the use of tazemetostat?
I think it's important that oncologists know that this is another option for patients, that it's generally well tolerated, that particularly for patients who have an alternative of chemotherapy, this may have a favorable safety and tolerability profile, in particular since it's an oral agent. Also, patients in some cases may have received or may alternatively receive PI3 kinase inhibitors. There are several of these that are approved for recurrent follicular lymphoma. So I think the practitioner needs to weigh whether or not an individual patient may be more appropriate for a PI3 kinase inhibitor versus tazemetostat. That said, certainly for patients who have an EZH2 mutation in their follicular lymphoma where the response rate is approximately 70%, I think this compares quite favorable to some of the alternative treatment options that those patients may have. Additionally, patients with wild-type EZH2 wild-type follicular lymphoma, the response rate being about a third of patients responding. Again, this may be based on the safety and efficacy profile, depending on the alternatives for an individual patient. Tazemetostat may be something appropriate to consider.
So moving forward, where do you possibly see the use of tazemetostat expanding?
Well, I think that certainly in follicular lymphoma, there are a number of different combinations that are being looked at. There is a phase 3 trial that's ongoing combining tazemetostat with lenalidomide and rituximab. Lenalidomide rituximab, also called R squared, is another approved agent for patients with recurrent follicular lymphoma. And so ongoing studies are looking at whether or not adding tazemetostat to that combination might be a useful treatment option. It's assessing the efficacy and safety of that profile. I think we will see combinations with chemotherapy. We'll see combinations with rituximab, other novel agents as well. And so again, it all depends on where those studies shake out as far as the efficacy and safety. But certainly there's at least preclinical rationale for these combinations. And again, obviously we'll need the randomized trials to see what tazemetostat adds to some of our alternative treatment options.
So looking forward in the field of follicular lymphoma in a more general sense, what sort of ongoing research interests you most?
Well, in follicular lymphoma, a major source of interest is the fact that there are patients that progress early within 24 months from their initial diagnosis. That group of patients is a group of patients that tends to have a less favorable outcome overall. About half of those patients have transformed lymphomas when they progress. So that accounts for about 10% overall of patients with follicular lymphoma. 20% overall will be these early progressors. Half of those, or 10% of the total, will have transformed disease. And another half of those, or another 10% overall, will recur early with follicular lymphoma. So that's a group of patients where there is a significant unmet need as far as their outcome. That's a group of patients that tends to have a less favorable long-term prognosis. And so identifying those patients at diagnosis, choosing a hopefully better treatment regimen that could essentially improve their long-term outlook, whether it's a treatment regimen applied at diagnosis or a treatment regimen applied at relapse. That's a major source of research interest and a major place where we are exploring new treatment options. So better identification of patients who are likely to have a less favorable prognosis, and again, an intervention that can improve that outcome is really important. Also, in the long term in patients with follicular lymphoma, since most patients will not die of their follicular lymphoma, having treatment options that can manage their quality of life in the long term and present with options that could hopefully cure follicular lymphoma or at least control it for a longer period of time with a better side effect profile, less toxicity, better quality of life. That's another area that is an important area of research. And clearly having new options for patients where standard chemotherapy and some of the other options aren't working is obviously an important sort of thing. That includes CAR T cells are being studied in that group of patients, as well as other new treatment options like bispecific monoclonal antibodies being one other area.
So that's all I had for you. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you think is worth mentioning in this space?
No, I think you asked all the right questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. I really do appreciate it.
Okay, take care. Thank you.